Okay, so we'll start now. Since in this Zoom I have only 40 minutes, so let the others join in as and when they do. And also, I'm recording it, so I will be putting it up later and sharing the link with you. So, today in this class, we are going to try and study something about this topic called spoilage and its prevention. So, this makes up the fifth unit in our syllabus. So, what is exactly this spoilage and how we can prevent it? We have to study that. So, whenever we say spoilage, what we mean is it is any kind of substandard quality which makes the product unfit for use. So, I'm sure you all must have seen and experienced these cases where some particular food item that we have, it becomes rotten or it becomes stale. Its taste will change, its appearance will change. Sometimes you'll be able to see some fungus like thing growing on it. So, like this, when we observe all these changes, then we say that the food has got spoiled. So, what do we mean by spoiled? We say the food is spoiled, then we mean that the quality of that food has become substandard. It is below the good quality what we expect it to have. And because of that substandard quality, that product has become unfit for use. Now, generally, this change can be either chemically induced or it can be caused by microorganisms. So, suppose sometimes microorganisms start growing there. Like if you have noticed sometimes in case of, say, something like paneer or cheese, you may sometimes notice one blackish color or one grayish blue color substance which starts growing on it beyond its expiry date. So, that is because some fungus has started to grow. Sometimes we may find that if you keep milk and even after heating it once or twice, after its shelf life is over, that milk gets curdled, it gets split up. So that is some kind of a chemical change which has taken place. So all these are examples of types of spoilage. So overall, if we try to classify, we say that spoilage can be microbial or non-microbial. So when we say microbial spoilage, we mean that microorganisms are responsible for that substance to get spoiled. So pathogenic microorganisms, or the metabolites from the microorganisms, or the excessive growth of the microorganisms, all this can lead to spoilage of the food. When we say non-microbial spoilage, then causes which are other than the chemical cause. Like for example, sometimes certain chemicals, they will be generated in that product. And because of those chemicals, there is spoilage which occurs. And that spoilage will change the flavor of the food. So similarly, there can be other causes, like there may be some enzymatic reactions which are taking place. If you've noticed, sometimes when we cut an apple or we cut a potato and we leave it open like that for some time without using it up immediately, we see that there is one brownish kind of color which comes. That is an enzymatic reaction because of an enzyme called peroxidase, which brings about some kind of an oxidative reaction there, and that is what is responsible for the spoilage. Then the third non-microbial cause can be certain physical factors. Like suppose you did not keep the food at the right temperature, or you exposed it to light, or you exposed it to moisture, humidity. Then all these things can also affect the color, the flavor, the texture of that particular food item. Similarly, other factors. Sometimes the food may get spoiled because it has got exposed to some insects came and bit into it, or say there were cockroaches running over it, or sometimes rats will bite some food or some container, and that will spoil the food. So all these chemicals, enzymatic reactions, physical factors, and all these other factors, other pests, all these come under the non-microbial causes of spoilage. I hope you are able to see the slides as I'm moving them. Can somebody please respond? What can you see right now on the screen?
Ma'am, the food classification by the spoilage rate, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fine. Good. Thank you. So this is a classification in which, based on what is the rate at which the foods are getting spoiled, we classify them into three categories. Firstly, we have those which get spoiled very fast. So they are called as perishable goods. Generally, their lifespan is very less, maybe just a few hours, maybe just one day, maybe just 2 days. So normally within 1 to 10 days, if it is going to get spoiled, then it comes in the category of perishable. And examples for this are foods like milk, curds, fish, meat, and so on. Then we have other foods which are not so sensitive, but they don't last beyond 2 weeks. Like, for example, if you take fruits or you take vegetables, they may last for about 1 week. If you have a banana and it is not yet fully ripe and you keep it, maybe 5 days, 7 days, it will be good. Then after that, it will start getting spoiled. Like this, they are called as semi perishable fruits and vegetables. And among those vegetables also, there are some which will last for longer time and some which last for lesser time. But they all come under the category of semi-perishable because you can keep them for some time, but not indefinitely. And then the third category are the foods called as non-perishable. Now, although we are saying non-perishable, we don't mean that these foods are never going to perish. They will get, I think you know the meaning of the word perish. Perish means to die, to get destroyed. So when we say perishable, we mean those which easily get destroyed, which die very quickly. Semi-perishable are half in the middle, like, and non-perishable are those which for very long time they will stay without getting spoiled. So if you have these pulses and grains like the rice, uncooked rice, wheat, or any other grains that you have, any of the dals that we are having, then if we take certain seeds, like if you take mustard or fenugreek, or what is fenugreek is menthia. If you take mustard, mustard is sasve. So like that, if you take all these items, they are the kind that for many months together they may stay intact. So they come under the non-perishable category. Then, like this, they have studied and they have tried to find out which are the organisms which cause spoilage commonly in certain food groups. So the here in this table you can see what is the food group, what is the type of spoilage that occurs, and what is the organism which causes spoilage. So this has been studied. Like, they have found that commonly when we take a substance like meat, the type of spoilage is called as putrefaction. Now, most often, which will be the organism which is responsible for this? Clostridium species, Pseudomonas species, and Proteus species. Like that. Then, in case of milk, the general type of spoilage that can happen is either it will get sour or it will become sweetly curdled. So, for that, there are certain organisms like Lactobacillus thermophilus, Bacillus cereus, which are involved. Then, if we say that there is black discoloration in cheese, that is because of Candida albicans, which is a fungus. So, like this, they have studied, and that is the classification, like what organism causes which type of spoilage. If you know some 2 or 3 in this, that is more than enough. So, what is it that happens with this contamination? Why, when we talk of microbial spoilage, what happens? There is a particular environment in which your substance is present. Then there are people who are going to handle it. Then there are certain equipments in which the handling is done. All these are responsible for introducing some contamination. Then once the product gets contaminated, then there will be microorganisms start growing in that. As they grow further and further, they will cause degradation of the product, and then that one container which was spoiled will spread it to all the other substances also. So this cycle takes place, and we have to understand what are all the factors which affect the spoilage so that we can take some measures to avoid those factors. Now, overall, if we look at it, we can have certain intrinsic factors and some extrinsic factors which are responsible for this spoilage. When we say intrinsic factors, intrinsic means inside. So, inside the product itself, there will be certain factors like the pH of that product, the moisture level of that product, what nutrients, what type of compounds it contains. These are the intrinsic factors which will affect the spoilage. When we look at extrinsic factors, they are the external condition. What is the temperature at which you have stored that product? What is the amount of light that is falling on that product? How much moisture and humidity it is exposed to externally? These are the extrinsic factors which will affect the spoilage. Then we have certain microbial factors, like which is the type of microorganism which has infected that product, what is the number of microorganisms which are there, that will affect how soon it gets spoiled. Then certain product factors, like what is the type of product that you have, what is the dosage form. Generally it has been observed that if you have a liquid dosage form, then the spoilage is faster as compared to solid dosage form. So a syrup will get spoiled faster as compared to a tablet or capsule. So like this, the formulation, the dosage form also influences the spoilage. And then finally, storage factors, how have you packed your product, what type of container you have used to pack it. Is that container something which is giving you foolproof packing? That is one factor. And then how it has been handled. Has it been handled carefully? Has it been handled in an hygienic manner? Has it been stored properly? Like suppose, let us say they are doing packing of tablets and capsules. They have to fill those tablets into a machine from where it will come, and then there will be strips which arrive, like blister packing or strip packing. So into that it will get added up and it will get packed. So while somebody is handling those tablets before they get packed, are they touching it with their empty hands, or have they used gloves and with the gloves they are touching? So like this kind of factors also will affect the spoilage. So this is the overview of what type of factors can affect. From our point of view, for pharmaceutical products, we have certain specific factors which have been found to affect microbial spoilage. So please note, because this subject is microbiology, we are studying about microbial spoilage in detail. We are not so much concerned about the non-microbial spoilage. Of course, that is also relevant, but since our subject is microbiology, we are not studying about that. We are only studying about microbial spoilage. So here, what are the factors which influence? First one, what is the size of the contaminant inoculum? That means how much of microorganism got introduced into your product. As we expect normally, the higher the concentration of the contaminating organism, greater will be the spoilage. So that is the first factor. Second factor is nutritional factors. Generally, it is found that if your product is such that it contains a lot of organic matter, then it will promote the growth of organisms. What we mean by this is, like suppose I have a syrup of paracetamol. With that syrup, in that paracetamol syrup, I don't have only paracetamol. I have some sweetening agent, some flavoring agent, some coloring agent, and some other diluents and other things like that I may have. So that is mostly chemical in nature. Suppose, let us say, I have a syrup which is prepared in a Ayurvedic manufacturing unit where I have taken extract of tulsi plant and I have taken ginger extract. Now, what happens in that syrup? This ginger and tulsi and other substances which I have added, they have come from a natural source. So the content of organic matter in that is more. What would have happened is, when I tried to take the extract, when I tried to extract the juice of the tulsi leaves, along with that extract, some little other ingredients, organic matter also would have got extracted. Generally, these microorganisms, they find it easier to grow whenever there is more concentration of organic matter. So those kind of products which contain lot of organic matter are more likely to get spoiled compared to a syrup or a product which does not contain natural ingredients. So if you compare the paracetamol syrup and you compare the tulsi syrup, you will find that spoilage is more likely in the tulsi syrup, not in the paracetamol syrup. So the nutritional factor makes a difference. The third factor is water. Now, if there is water, it will influence how the microorganisms grow. So generally there is one parameter called as water activity, which is denoted as A with W as the subscript. So this water activity tells us for every particular compound, every solvent, every product, you can have one parameter called as the water activity. So if there is high water activity, then organisms grow more. Now this high water activity is seen when the concentration of water is more in a particular product. So if you make a syrup which is having more of water and less of sugar, there is more likelihood that organisms will grow in that. That is why when we prepare syrups, we have a particular saturated concentration that we are using. I think if you remember, it is some 66.6 or something like that we are saying. So reducing that water activity will help us to prevent spoilage. So if you have a syrup where the concentration of sugar is more, then because there is more sugar and less water, that water activity we are reducing. So when that water activity is low, then the spoilage is also less. The fourth factor is storage temperature. What is the temperature at which you have stored your product? That will decide whether it gets spoiled or not and how fast it gets spoiled. Generally, if we want to keep something long term, we say that we should use deep freezing at a temperature below minus 20 degrees. So minus 20 degrees and below, that deep freezing will help us to keep those items for longer time. Refrigeration is recommended for certain products. So when we say store in the refrigerator, we mean that you should store it at a temperature between 8 to 12 degrees. Now, we must remember that unless it is told to store in these methods, we should not store them like that. Like many times people have a habit that whatever medicine they buy from the medical store, once they bring it home, once they start taking the medicine also, they will put it into the fridge. We should advise them against doing such things. If it is told store in the refrigerator, then only you should store in the refrigerator. Like for example, if somebody is diabetic and they are taking insulin, then that insulin has to be stored in the refrigerator. But that insulin should not be put in the deep freezer. It should just be kept in the door of the refrigerator. Suppose somebody is taking a syrup. They should not put that syrup into the refrigerator, because what will happen is once you put it into the fridge, the low temperature in that fridge will cause crystallizing of the sugar. So if the sugar crystallizes out, then the concentration of the drug in that bottle will change. So we must make sure that we don't do such things. Now, for some substances where it is told keep in the refrigerator, we should keep there. So if you store according to the instructions which come, then you can avoid this microbial growth. If the product label is telling store in refrigerator, but you are not storing in refrigerator, then there will be microbial growth which takes place. Similarly, in the pharmaceutical industry, now suppose there is water for injection which is being used. That water for injection will keep circulating through the pipes. That water for injection should be kept circulating at very high temperatures above 80 degrees centigrade. Why that is important? As the water is in the tube, when it is staying in those pipes, it is becoming stagnant for some time. So if you keep it at normal room temperature, there is a chance that microorganisms will start growing in that water. Now we are saying water for injection. So water for injection means it is sterile in nature. So if it has to retain that sterile quality, if the organism should be prevented from growing in that water, then you must keep it at a high temperature. So like this, we need to be aware that the temperature at which we are storing a particular item will decide whether it undergoes spoilage or not. Then next, pH. Generally, it is found that if you keep the pH of the product either acidic or alkaline, it is more resistant to spoilage. Means it does not get spoiled very fast. However, if you keep pH neutral, then those kind of products spoil very fast. They are best, that neutral pH is best for growth of the microorganisms. So we must make sure that we are adjusting the pH in such a way that microorganisms cannot grow in that product. However, while we are adjusting this pH, we have to also consider the property of our product. If our product is something which is getting degraded in acidic medium or alkaline medium, we can't keep that pH. So we have to like balance between these two things. The other quality, the other parameter is redox potential. So suppose you have certain products which are present in a medium which is redox, which is reducing in nature, or it is oxidizing in nature, then this redox potential tells us about whether that particular compound is able to supply electrons or not. So if it supplies electrons, or if it contains substances which are electron acceptors, that will play an impact on the respiratory pathway through the electron transport chain in the microorganism. So this redox potential also we have to consider once you have your formulation or product. What is the redox potential of that? You should adjust that in such a way that it does not allow microorganisms to grow. And finally, packaging design. So how you pack your product, that will decide whether microorganisms are able to get into your product or not. Suppose I put something in a container and I seal it, but I don't make it an airtight seal. Then what will happen? If the seal is not airtight, then all the time air will be flowing into the product, and along with the air, naturally, microorganisms also will be there. So most of the time, from the chemical reactivity point of view, glass is a very good material to pack materials. But glass has the problem that it is very delicate, it is fragile, it can break. So then it is found that rather than glass, certain kinds of plastics. But then if you're using the plastic, you must make sure that it is um, not going to affect the properties of the product. We don't want our drug to get absorbed onto the plastic, nor do we want the drug to be leached out into something from the plastic container to be leached out into the product. So like this, plastics are preferred, but you have to carefully study their parameters and then decide which type of plastic you're going to use. Similarly, if you make your packing such that it is waterproof or you have self-sealing closures, then these kind of increased protective measures will help us to keep our product safe. So if you have good packaging design which does not allow contact with the external atmosphere, then that kind of packaging will help us to reduce the microbial spoilage. Other than these main factors, there are some other factors also, like relative humidity, what is the moisture content, how much oxygen is available, what is the osmotic pressure of that product, what is the surface tension of that product. These also may be relevant to reduce the microbial spoilage. We should consider the effect of all these factors and then decide how we are going to process it. Generally, if we want to know how the product gets spoiled, we should also understand what are the sources of contamination, from where all it is likely that the organisms, the microorganisms, will enter into our product. So, the first possible cause is the atmosphere, the environment in which we are processing our product. So, suppose we don't have a good condition of the air and the environment in our manufacturing area or in our storage area, then the microorganisms which are growing in that area, they can enter into our product. If you see here, there is one term here which says microbial growth in HVAC systems. What is this HVAC system? We will come to when we study about aseptic area. HVAC stands for heat ventilation air conditioning system. So if you are having a system where the handling of the air is taking place, where the ventilation is set up, now, if that system is such that there are microorganisms inside that system, and if you don't maintain proper air pressure in the areas where you're manufacturing the product, then that problem with the atmosphere can lead to contamination of your product. Second factor, second source of contamination is the operators who are handling that product. So if the operator is somebody who is directly coming in contact with the product, if they don't have good hygiene practices, or if they have cuts and wounds and open wounds from where microorganisms can enter into the product, then this is another source for the contamination. The third source is the raw materials. Whenever we are making a product, we start with some raw materials and then we make it go through certain procedures to give us our finished product. So if that raw material is such that it is having high initial bioburden, if it is highly contaminated with microorganisms, if the raw material is contaminated, and suppose we use water to prepare our product and that water is also contaminated, then that will become responsible for contamination in the final product. So we must make sure that we use good quality raw material which is having zero bacterial count. We must use water which is of distilled water quality so that there are no microorganisms in that water. So by controlling the quality of the raw materials and water, we can control the quality of our product. And fourthly, the equipment. Now, I may have very good raw materials. I have good quality water. My operators are also very hygienic. They are wearing gloves. They are wearing mask. They are wearing cap. Nothing from them is contaminating the product. And I have kept my air atmosphere in that room also very clean. There are no microorganisms in that area. If I do all this also, but the equipment in which I am doing the processing of that particular product, if that is not clean, if that contains microorganisms, then no matter what else I do, my product will get contaminated. So the equipment should be kept sufficiently clean, it should be regularly disinfected, and it should be used in a proper way to make sure that there is no contamination. So these are the four major sources of contamination: the atmosphere, the operators, the raw materials, and the equipment. Next, how do we know whether something has got contaminated? Generally, at home, if we see for the foodstuffs that we talked about, if you find that the smell changes of the food, or you find that the taste changes, or sometimes what was supposed to be one thin liquid became like one slimy mass, then we come to know that contamination has taken place, that the product has got spoiled. Overall, generally, if you find that there is some kind of a gas which is bubbling in that product, some kind of a smell which is coming there, bad odor, or if the product got discolored, normally it was a colorless liquid, but now it has become brown in color. Or suppose you find that the pH has changed very drastically, or something which was a clear liquid now becomes a turbid liquid. And in case of ointments and creams, we know that normally the ointment or the cream, when we apply it on our skin, it is supposed to give us a smooth feeling. But suppose you apply a cream and instead of giving you smoothness, you feel something, some, particle like. That is called as grittiness. If you find that some particles are irritating your skin when you have applied that cream, then that grittiness in the cream can indicate that it has got contaminated. So here we have some few examples of contaminants which are commonly found in pharmaceutical products, like eye ointments, antibiotic eye ointments. Generally, they contain this organism called Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Similarly, thyroid tablets, they may contain this organism called Salmonella munchen. Like this, there are many different contaminants which are found in pharmaceutical products. So, if we are aware that what organism is likely to be present, we can take measures to prevent the contamination by that particular organism. So, whenever we want to assess, now we talked about sources, causes, and all that. How do we assess whether some product has got contaminated or not? First thing we can do is sterility testing. Like we know that for products which are supposed to be sterile, if we do sterility testing, we can make out whether they contain organisms or they don't contain organisms. The second kind of test which is done is called as bioburden determination. So here we measure a property called as the total viable count, and this is done for non-sterile products. Thirdly, we can do monitoring of the air to ensure that the quality of the air in that processing area is clean and neat. So that is the air monitoring that we can do. So these are the three types of assessments that we can do to find out if there is contamination. Now, I know that my product is going to get contaminated, or I know that till I have made my product, I have sealed it in an airtight container, I have made it completely closed. So until it reaches to the customer, until it reaches the patient, that product is going to stay safe. But once the patient takes that product home and he opens that syrup bottle, or he starts opening the tablet strip, what is likely to happen? These substances, which were until then they were in good quality, they can start to get contaminated. So to prevent that kind of an effect, we add certain substances to these products to keep them stable. Those kind of compounds are called as preservatives. You must be knowing that in food also there are preservatives which are added. Like that, in drugs and medicines also we add preservatives. So these preservatives are chemical substances which enhance the product shelf life by inhibiting microbial growth. I think you are aware that shelf life means what is the duration of time from the date of manufacturing to the date of expiry. So if I want my product to stay stable throughout that shelf life, I must make sure that microorganisms don't grow in that. So I add certain chemical substances called as preservatives to keep that product proper in good condition without spoilage throughout its shelf life. So if I want to use some substance as a pharmaceutical preservative, I need to have lot of properties that I have to check for that. Firstly, it should have broad spectrum antimicrobial activity. It should be capable of killing different kinds of microorganisms which may enter the product. It should be able to kill those microorganisms very quickly. So rapid killing rate is also important. Thirdly, just because I added the preservative, it should not interfere with other ingredients which are there in my formulation. So it should be compatible with those other ingredients. Then it should be non-irritant and non-toxic to patients. It should be effective and stable throughout the shelf life of that product. That preservative should not get absorbed on the container or closure of my product. It should be water soluble, it should be heat stable, and even if the microbial load starts to increase, this preservative should be able to retain its activity. These are some of the important properties for ideal pharmaceutical preservative. What are the different types of preservatives that we are using? Based on their mechanism of action, we can have three categories of preservatives. First are the antioxidants, and examples for this are butylated hydroxyanisole and butylated hydroxytoluene. The second category of preservatives are antimicrobials like sodium benzoate and sorbates. The third category are chelating agents like EDTA and citric acid. So, what the antioxidants will do, they are the preservatives which are going to act by preventing oxidation reactions if microorganisms are present there. So they will not allow that microorganism to cause oxidation reaction, and that is why they are acting as preservative. What are these antimicrobials? They are the compounds which will destroy, they will kill the microorganisms, and because of that they will keep your product stable. And third are the chelating agents. They will form a complex or a chelate with the microorganisms and prevent them from interfering in your product. So these are the different categories of preservatives that we use. Some common preservatives which are used in pharmaceutical formulation, depending on the type of dosage form, we use particular formulations. So this table is there in the notes also. We can refer to that and learn a few, some 4 or 5 names we should know of the different categories of preservatives commonly used in different kinds of pharmaceutical formulations. Now, other than using preservatives, we can use some other strategies also to prevent spoilage. Like we can adjust the pH in such a way that microorganisms cannot grow in that. We can use good quality packing materials. We can employ certain compounds called biocides in the coating materials. Then we can use waterproof packing materials, and we can use substances like desiccants, drying agents to absorb the moisture in the product. So using all these strategies, it is possible for us using all these strategies and preservatives, we can ensure that our products don't get spoiled. Now, the last part of this chapter is what is called as the preservative challenge test. So, this test is important to check whether my preservative has been effective or not. So, I have added preservative into my product. Yes, and I'm thinking that it is going to protect my product. But is it actually doing that or not? I need to assess that. So, for that, the United States Pharmacopoeia in the chapter 51 specifies this test called as preservative challenge test. So in this, what we will do is we use different kinds of organisms like bacteria and fungi. Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Staphylococcus aureus are the bacteria which can be used for the test, and Candida albicans can be used as the fungus. So what we do is, now I have my product into which I have added preservative. I want to check whether the preservative is really effective or not. So what I do is I take the contents of this product and I add little into 5 different containers. Into each of those containers, I will add different microorganisms. Okay. And once I've added the organism, I measure what is the concentration of the organism in each of these tubes. Then what I do is this mixture of my product plus the organism, I incubate at room temperature for at least 7 days. After 7 days, again I take that tubes, all those 5 tubes, and I check how many microorganisms are there in that. So I have my initial number of microorganisms, and I now when I test after 7 days, I know how many organisms are there. So based on that data, I can say whether my preservative was effective or not. If my preservative was really effective, then what should have happened? The organisms, number of organisms should not have increased, and in fact, it should have decreased. But if I find that number of organisms has increased, then it means that my preservative was not good. It was not able to kill those microorganisms, and therefore the preservative is not effective. Sometimes this test can be done. Now, minimum quantity you need to keep is for 7 days. Sometimes you can do the test further and let it stay for 14 days, 21 days, 28 days. Sometimes what they may also do is that after 7 days, they may add some more organisms, again allowed to incubate for 7 days. Like that, they can do. But that is optional. The minimum thing is you keep for 7 days. So this is what is done as the preservative efficiency test. So why this is important to us? Because if we have contaminated products, there can be loss of potency of the product, the effectiveness of the drug may be lost, or it may induce some adverse reactions. It may cause a disease. Instead of solving your problem, it may create more problem for the people who have taken that drug. So it is very important for us to make sure that we have a situation where there is no spoilage in our pharmaceutical products. So this is all that we had to cover today. So we have talked about right from the beginning. We talked about the definition. We talked about types of spoilage. We gave examples of organisms and factors affecting spoilage, sources of contamination, preservatives, and the preservative efficacy test. So these are all the things we've covered. With that, this unit is over. Whatever recording I have done of today's session, I will be putting it up on the YouTube channel and send you the link for it. The next class can be